Greetings gamers, I'm Anto and today we're going to be writing the first session for our Homebrew campaign. During the last few months I've been building my Homebrew campaign setting, the Nation of Ashk, and during that time we've made a map, we've decided on a pantheon of gods, we've created our central tension, created a starting city, and created our first major villain. So the time has come for us to start working on our very first session. Your first campaign session needs to accomplish a few different things. First, it needs to get your players excited about the campaign. Second, it needs to be an exciting individual standalone adventure. Third, it needs to introduce your players to the world and let them learn about it a little bit. Fourth, it needs to set the tone for the campaign and what the players can expect going forward. And fifth, it needs to set up future events. Now that's a tall order for a single campaign, but using all the work we've done so far, I'm confident that we can achieve it. The first thing to decide is whether or not the players are going to start in the city of Azim, because whether they start in the city or not is going to change how we deliver information to them. If they are from the city of Azim or have spent some time there or are familiar with the city in any meaningful way, then we can deliver more information to them up front because it's things that their character would know. Whereas if they're not from the city, we can introduce information to them as they encounter things in the city. It's for that reason I think it's better to start this adventure outside of the city and have none of the characters be from Azim. That way we can have this first standalone adventure and that can end with them arriving at the city and starting the campaign proper. Then we need to think about what brings our heroes together. What is it that's brought these different people from potentially different places together to this one location? We want to allow them to have come from different places before their first meeting, whilst also giving the possibility that if they want to all know each other or be from an organisation, that needs to be included as well. So the perfect start for this adventure is going to be that they've been hired to do a job. It's a classic starting trope for D&D with good reason, because it brings your players together and gives them a reason to stay together, at least for the duration of this first couple of sessions. So our players have been hired to do a job, but what is that job? Well, let's refer back to our goals and see what we can come up with. We need a fun standalone adventure that sets the tone for the campaign and introduces them to the world. And I think the perfect way to do that is with a classic dungeon crawl. It's a staple of D&D and tabletop RPGs. It's a great introduction for people that have never played before, and by introducing a few different elements, we can give a different take on it that veteran players might not expect. So for our very first session, our players will have been hired by an NPC from Azim named Skylar Rana, and she wants the players to delve into the tomb of Adnan. Adnan was a famous wizard and scholar who discovered many of the mysteries of life and death. The dungeon the players will be travelling to was once his laboratory, where he experimented with different kinds of death magic. Ultimately, he contracted the plague, and during his final days he began adding traps and obstacles to the place that would eventually become his tomb to stop people coming and stealing his secrets. The last anyone saw Adnan was when he brought a group of followers into his tomb and sealed it shut. Skylar has already hired a group of NPCs from Azim to attempt this task, and all but one of them has died. So she has to look further afield and advertise this job outside of the city so that the local law enforcement don't crack down on her. Before the campaign, we will have sent a letter to our players from Skylar explaining everything I've already gone over and giving them their down payment of 100 gold. And she'll tell them that if they're successful, they can collect their remaining reward directly from her within the city of Azim. Our players will have been given a map that shows them how to get to the point that the previous group that descended into this tomb reached, and with that, that is where our adventure will begin. So now it's time to start building the dungeon itself. As usual, I'm going to use the 5-room dungeon technique to get a rough framework for this dungeon. I've talked at length in the past about why I love the 5-room dungeon, but it comes down to the fact that I think a 5-room dungeon gives you every individual element that you want from a game of D&D in one session. So the entrance room is going to be the room where the previous group failed. In this room there are 4 statues and 4 platforms in the corners of the room. These statues depict different deities, and 3 of them are whole and 1 of them is damaged with its head and 1 arm missing. Each of these statues has a carved necklace with the pendant missing. Now this entrance room is our puzzle. When you stand on the 4 platforms in the corner, you will feel a different effect depending on which one you stand. One will make you feel slightly warmer, one you will feel a slight breeze, one will make you feel slightly colder, and another will make you feel a tremble in the earth. In the center of each of these platforms will be a small runed talisman. The players should quickly realize that the 4 platforms are related to the 4 elements, and that these rune talismans must be placed onto the pendants of the statues. Each statue is of a deity who has a domain in one of these elements, and the puzzle is going to be matching the talisman to the correct statue, which will open the door. If you place the incorrect talisman on a statue, the statue is going to come to life and swing at you with one of its weapons, which is how the previous group died. The players can use knowledge or history checks to see if they know enough about any of these deities to know what element they might have domain over, but otherwise it's going to be a case of trial and error. However, there are lots of little things that you can change if you want to make things easier or more difficult for your players. If you want to make things easier, you can have a talisman already be placed in one of the statues, but it's the wrong talisman, and at the foot of the statue you'll either see a corpse or a puddle of blood, and the statue's weapon will be bloody. That should communicate to the players that the talisman that's on the statue is the wrong one, which eliminates one choice. They've only got a 1 in 3 instead of a 1 in 4 chance now. Or you could have a talisman already be placed in the correct statue, and maybe when the statues have the talismans placed on them, they turn and look towards the door. You could use a combination of them to limit the number of trial and error that the players have to go through if they don't have any knowledge of deities. Or if you wanted to make things more difficult, you could have 2 of the statues be damaged so that there are 2 unknown deities in the room. But once the players have placed all the talismans, the door will slide out of the way to reveal the dungeon proper. The next section will be a long corridor that slopes downwards. As they enter into this corridor, they'll see on the wall above the door behind them is a carved relief of the world. As they make their way down this corridor, make secret perception or spot checks for them to see whether they spot the traps that you've placed in this corridor. This is a secret skill challenge. If they fail and trigger 3 traps, the door behind them is going to slam closed, and a huge boulder is going to burst through that relief of the world on the wall and come rolling down the corridor towards them. And they can have a really great Indiana Jones style moment where they have to run through the corridor and try and avoid any more traps in front of them whilst evading this boulder. Once the boulder comes out, this turns from a secret skill challenge into an overt skill challenge, and you'll ask your players for different skill rolls for them to leap over traps, swing underneath things, duck down, use their dexterity to dart between traps as they come out the wall, and create this sense of tension all the while the boulder is coming up behind them. But at the end of the corridor, they'll jump into the next room and the boulder will crash into the wall, crack the doorway, and get stuck. And this is their setback room. The door they have come through is blocked by the boulder. They are trapped in Adnan's tomb, and their only option now is to press forward and hope there is a second exit. The room the players find themselves in seems to be some kind of laboratory. There are tables with various chemistry instruments, there are books and rolls of parchment everywhere, and along one wall is a line of metal tables, each with a skeleton on, and several tables bearing surgical instruments. Each of these skeletons will also be missing one limb, and it's important to mention that because that's going to come into play later on. So as our players adjust from fleeing from that boulder and start to take in their surroundings, these skeletons are going to rise off their surgical tables and our first combat will begin. This should be a fairly straightforward encounter. They are pretty standard skeletons. You can adjust them if you want things a little more difficult, maybe use some different profiles if you want a higher level encounter, but it should be a fairly basic fight and not a huge threat to the party. So the players will defeat the skeletons, go through the door and descend down some stairs into what looks like a large church, a large meeting room, at the end of which there's a raised dais and a throne, and upon the throne sit the skeletal remains of the wizard Adnan, and around his feet and in the pews throughout this room will be more skeletons. When the players enter this room, Adnan will seem to rouse from a deep sleep, and he'll speak in a language that they don't understand. When they don't respond, he'll tilt his head, cycle through a few more distinct languages until eventually he starts speaking common to them. During the course of that conversation, he will tell them that he was partly successful. He did manage to cheat death to a degree, but he is bound to this place. If he were to leave his tomb, the magics that are currently keeping him alive would fail and he would crumble into dust. His goal for the longest time has been to wait for someone to make it through his tomb so that he can take their body, and he will tell the players that's exactly what he intends to do with them, and then combat can begin. This combat will be a little more challenging than our first. The skeletons will be largely the same, but Adnan will be able to use a few spells to hamper the players. Nothing too outrageous because he is technically dead. The magic of his tomb is keeping him alive, and much of his power that he once had is gone. So he will have several cantrips and a few first level spells, but nothing super dangerous, just enough to make the fight interesting. Maybe some things like rope trick to bind the players, or spells like dancing lights to dazzle them. Once Adnan and his followers are defeated, the players have seemingly been successful. They've defeated Adnan, they've beaten the tomb, but they'll quickly realise that the journals that they have come here to find are nowhere to be seen. There is a staircase at the back of the room. If they follow that, it will lead to a secret door that will open out into the initial room that they were in, the room with the deity statues, but nowhere will they be able to see the books. So they're going to have to go back and look for a secret door that will open into a side room that has Adnan's work inside. This is our red herring. The players think they've won, and they think they've defeated Adnan and beaten the dungeon, and all they need to do is recover his work. But you remember those skeletons that I talked about before that were missing one arm? Well, when they open up this secret door, they'll realise that Adnan has been trying to build himself a new body, and they will be met with a bone golem, a creature that is constructed of various bone limbs from the different skeletons down in this tomb, and that creature will be infused with Adnan's spirit after he dies, and there will be a second fight. This fight doesn't need to be especially hard. The shock of opening the door and finding this bone golem is the real prize here for the players, but you can scale the difficulty. If the previous fights haven't been very difficult for the players, well, maybe up the bone golem's HP, increase its damage as needed. If everything else has been relatively punishing, well, maybe this bone golem is a very weak and poor construct that would not have been able to bear Adnan out of the tomb anyway. Once they've defeated the bone golem, they can look around this room and they'll quite quickly discover Adnan's journals, and they'll be able to take them with them up that staircase at the back of the meeting room, back into the room with the deities, and out of the tomb. Once the players return to the surface, all that is left for them is to return to Azim to recover their reward. And we'll end the session on their arrival into Azim and start the next one with them claiming their reward. So that the last thing we do in this session is them arriving in the big city and seeing the world before them and all the possibilities. So there we have it, Adnan's Tomb, the first mission of our Homebrew campaign. Let's look back and see if we met those design goals that I set out at the start of the video. We gave our players an exciting adventure that had puzzles and traps and combat encounters and some surprises. Our players will have learned a little bit about the world they are playing in, they'll have learned about the wizard Adnan, and hopefully they will have also gained some information on a few of the deities that might come into play later in the campaign. We set up the tone for our campaign, one that's filled with adventure and peril. We set up the future by placing the reward inside the city and ending our adventure before we get there, so that the next session the players know what they have to do, at least at the start, which gives them a clear path forward. And finally, I think that anyone that played this session would be pretty excited to carry on into this world. So I think that we've accomplished all of our goals and we've ended up with a pretty fun adventure. If you'd like to play this adventure for yourself, everything you need, including maps, the letter to send to your players, all of that stuff is going to be available on my Patreon for all of my patrons. The link to that is going to be down in the description and at the end of the video. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful and got some inspiration for it. If Adnan's Tomb is an adventure that you would run either as part of your campaign or as the start of a new campaign, I'd love to hear that in the comments below. But until next time, happy gaming. If you're new here and like what you see, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I release new RPG related content every single week. And if you enjoy what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon. You get access to behind the scenes video, early access to the regular videos, exclusive content, and a whole bunch more. And if you want to keep watching, I've got a couple of videos over there that you might enjoy. And until next time, happy gaming.